No, Ron, you're supposed to save that until the end of the episode when the cheesy music starts playing. We open this week with our heroines contacting those plot points I had almost forgotten were a thing. Hi, King Candy. I did not miss you or your creepy design and voice. But yeah, they reported into their higher-ups, including Doctor Strange here. Guess he finished up filming Multiverse of Madness. That must have been hell. And they talked about the formation of the team, as well as the unfortunate fact that Ron's cure stuff became a roadmap for the villains. Well, that's unfortunate, but I'm sure nothing will come of this.
あらあらランちゃん、一体何を決めたのかしら。考察ありがとう。
And overall, this actually was a good way of re-establishing the show's status quo because, disregarding the hiatus, we haven't seen these characters in a hot minute. And speaking of absentee characters, the next day at school... Now you see, dude, this is what happens when you leave your show for too long. Your girlfriend becomes a lesbian. Granted, that more applied with Kokone, which is fine by me, as I ship her more with Yui. As for Ron, though, she was in a very three-faced mood as something was clearly bothering her. Thus, their leader proposed a walking food tour of their town to sample all of their goods and grow closer as a team. Meanwhile, the lair of the bundles, we thankfully didn't get the usual bit of Secretary just giving her partner her lunch order, but...
Precure.
Oh, no. Precure, Toy, please, don't do this. You've run this cliche into the ground with Precure and Sentai, so please, just don't do it. But yeah, after some very blatant foreshadowing, Gentle took notice of the fact that Ron had stopped posting on her social media. Also, that's clearly an iPhone 6 camera, and yet she's getting 5G coverage. Figures a villain would jailbreak their phone. Back with our heroines, they rendezvoused, and we got some more of the requisite food prawn, as well as you-know-who.
Yui-chan たちが選んだのは桜餅。そのお味は?
Count one just for this entire tourist scene. I mean, she talks throughout it, and I could count more, but I won't. The most interesting takeaway was the fact that the watches allowed them to see the food fairies more clearly, which is at least a nice little bit of world building, which this show is in dire need of. And appropriately enough, each of the foods they sampled represented their respective signature starches, with the exception of Ron, who instead of noodles, went with what we call on these islands manapua. Yeah, but are they good enough that you'd have an awesome climactic fight scene over it? Now that's the real question she should be asking. FYI, I also considered a Bao reference, but that short kind of disturbs me, and I don't want to put y'all through that. Of course, after sampling all of these goods, Ron wanted to post about it on her cure stub, but couldn't because 1, she didn't seem to take any pictures, and 2... Ron, I'm pretty sure the fad right now is to leave that other social media platform. But yeah, as the title of the episode gave away, Ron decided to indefinitely freeze her Kirsta account until the conflict with the bundles was over. And honestly, that's a noble enough call, and does make a lot of practical sense considering their situation, but then they decided to really play it off as a big deal. Yeah, because leaving social media is so hard? I mean, this might be my inner boomer talking, as well as the fact that I've never really taken to social media, but it does feel like they're making this a little too melodramatic than it needs to be. Not helped by the fact that a certain someone made even harder to take seriously. Yes, officer, you can add stocking to those charges. Jokes aside, I did like what he said here about posting responsibly online, which can apply to anything, not just copyright-friendly versions of Instagram. And in general, it is nice to see Ron's friends support her. Though, I'm not sure why Yui brought up udon here. I mean, it's a Japanese noodle dish, but isn't Ron's thing the Chinese ramen? I don't know, maybe she just played Spirit of Justice or something. Anyway, even though she had left the platform, there was still one post that Gento still hadn't gotten to yet. Thus, she struck a burger diner called The Diner because they have to really be on the nose. I mean, come on, where in the world would they have a burger joint with such a basic bitch-ass name? I retract my statement. Also, highly recommend this place if you ever visit Honolulu. I mean, it's certainly a better food place than...
なんだこの味ポテトもハンバーガーも突然変になったぞ
Well, that's what happens when y'all sell out to the Krabby on Mondays.
Do you know what's in that Krabby Patty you're eating?
No.
And again, even though some of this stuff was a little melodramatic, I gotta give points to Ron for not taking her post being misused lightly. She would need this determination, as Gentle managed to turn a hydrodynamic spatula into a monster. Hopefully it doesn't have a turbo drive. Also, no, I will never give up on the SpongeBob references. And they engaged the monster, though not before the forgotten side character finally started to get in on what was going on. Unfortunately, there was no group transformation this week. I guess they wanted to show Ron's full transformation again, but at least the actual fight was quite good, even disregarding the now very inconsistent battle system, as this two-fairy monster had them on the ropes. Quick, Ron, use this action card! But yeah, the animation this week was directed by the returning duo of Kenichihara and Nogyo Bo, which would explain some of Ron's very Yuma-esque faces in this one. And while she didn't have Utopia, she did have a good strategy for dealing with the flat-footed monster by creating a ton of unavoidable potholes for it to get stuck in. And I guess this was supposed to tie into the udon analogy, though I still think ramen would have been just as effective, but whatever. And after making a Star Ninja reference, the episode ended with Ron figuring out a solution to her social media problem, that being takeout.
Oh, okay. What?
Like, I'm guessing she's gonna take out most of her food now and try to purposely leave out the exact location of where it came from in her post, but then doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of blogging about it if her regular followers don't know where it came from? I don't know, this just feels like a rather wishy-washy ending is all. This was, relatively speaking, an okay-ish episode to Ron's good debut episode. I mean, on the one hand, we did get a much better fight scene this week, animated by a couple of Yu-Gi-Oh! Alumni. But on the other hand, that ending, while not necessarily bad, does feel like a case of them trying to have their cake and eat it too. So that was my only real issue with this episode, and nothing else at all. Nope, nothing, Play it. More on this during the closing thoughts, but also...
What a surprise.
As I said last week, I did like the incorporation of social media into Ron's character and how they're tackling some very relevant issues, especially right now considering how much of a talking point it's become. Thus, Ron considering quitting it is a good topical conflict to cover, and while not exactly the most classically hero thing to do, it is a good way of establishing her stance as a Precure. Thus, I really do wish she had stuck to her guns and not gone back to blogging. Granted, now the bundles will probably just look up other accounts instead, or just use Google, but it also does feel like a bit of a forced happy ending after all that drama. Still, as a means of exhibiting Ron's personality, it was a good showing, and the fight this week feels like what it should have been last week, so better late than never, I guess. Plus, it is good that we're starting to build at least a little lore here, and hopefully we won't completely forget about elements like the Cook Kingdom. So, overall, this episode on its own was pretty good, other than that unsatisfying ending. All that said, let's address the bigger series-spanning element that is Gentle, now confirmed to be Amine, wearing a magical mask. Yeah, I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I say she's gonna be the Sixth Ranger of the show, because they're checking off everything in the Tommy Oliver playbook, including a trope I've always been vehemently against: brainwashing. As I've said, I think it's really played out, and often does rob a former antagonist of the opportunity to really reflect on the sins that they actually chose to commit, as opposed to being forced into. And while Toa somewhat managed to pull this off, it was only really because they really dug into the gravitas of what being abducted and brainwashed for many years can do to a person's psyche, and I kind of doubt they'll do that for this less serious show. Now granted, we're not completely filled in on the situation, so it might not exactly be brainwashing, but it does at least seem to be a case of split personality, which would explain the lack of shared memories. Either way though, I'm not too thrilled about this twist, and while they could change my mind later, I'm keeping my expectations for this particular plotline low. Also, if you're gonna rip off Bakugan of all things, at least do the gender bending for the WTF factor. And if you haven't seen it yet, we actually managed to get part 2 of the Tropical Rouge manga review out this week, with a little cameo from a certain other team. Hey, gotta feed that algorithm somehow, am I right? But with that done, I think part 3 should be out eventually, but I also kind of want to move on to something else. Yeah, as I've not been so subtly hinting at, I've been meaning to tackle a certain card game from mine and likely your childhood, but having really delved into it, we realized that Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't going to be a small project. Plus, and to be frank, there has been another card game franchise that I've really wanted to talk about instead, that even has some strong ties with toys, so it is at least relevant to this channel. Thus, while Yu-Gi-Oh! Video will eventually come out, there's another card game anime that I think deserves a lot more attention than the minuscule amount of official exposure it got here in the West. With that in mind, do look forward to a few gates opening very soon. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and in case you're wondering, no, I'm not leaving Twitter anytime soon, especially when all of these meltdowns are starting to get really good. Ooh, I gotta make some popcorn.